What if the boldest act of rebellion today isn't shouting in the streets, but simply living without needing anyone? No contracts. No forever promises. No pressure to belong. What happens when you stop trying to fit into what the world expects of you? Not as some proud declaration, but as the quiet result of an internal shift. What happens when you realize you don't need to get married, build a family, or follow the social script to feel whole? That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who sees clearly. And that clarity? It makes people uncomfortable. This isn't about hating love or shutting the door on connection. It's about something much more unsettling. You've stopped obeying. Suddenly, you're no longer driven by fear of loneliness or the hunger for approval. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. And that, in a society built on invisible rules, is dangerous. Because if you can be free, then maybe others can too. And if they dare, the whole house of cards falls apart. There's something about you that no longer fits. Not because you can't love, but because you've learned to love without clinging. Not because you're against sharing your life, but because you're done offering it out of fear of being alone. You've become dangerous. Not for what you do, but for what you represent. You're not looking for someone to complete your identity. You're not using anyone as emotional life support. You don't need to sign a contract to feel like your life has meaning. You've started living from conviction, not tradition. And even if no one says it out loud, that's destabilizing. Because most people are still being pulled along by the momentum of what's right, normal, socially acceptable. But not you. You've learned how to sit with silence. You've realized that companionship shouldn't be a numbing agent. That love without freedom is just a cage with flowers. That duty without awareness is just decorated slavery. And most of all, you've discovered that being alone doesn't mean being empty. In fact, it's often in solitude that the deepest revolutions happen. They don't want you to think like this. Because if you do, you stop buying into the soulmate myth, the romantic sacrifice, the perfect couple as salvation. You stop consuming what the feelings industry needs to sell you. You stop needing to fit into a story designed to make you feel broken for being alone. And a person who doesn't need to consume neither emotional fantasies nor inherited structures becomes subversive. You've stopped chasing approval. You're no longer looking for applause dressed up as advice. You're not waiting to hear, "It's about time," or "You really should find someone." Because you know this. If you don't have yourself, having someone else means nothing. You've understood something that can't be explained, only felt. Real love doesn't come from fear, it comes from freedom. And now you walk differently. Not with arrogance, but with a kind of calm that unsettles people. A quiet peace that doesn't need to be explained. While others panic to meet life's emotional deadlines, you've thrown the calendar away. You chose to be yourself over being accepted. You gave up the need for a role and allowed yourself to simply exist. Silent. Complete. So what happens when a person no longer needs to belong? When someone stops living by habit and starts following their own voice? The answer is simple and a little brutal. They become a threat. Because they expose the fragility of the system that keeps us tame. And they do it without shouting, without preaching, without forcing anything. Just by existing. History is filled with men and women who chose to live without asking for permission. Who picked truth over comfort. Nietzsche called them free spirits, not outcasts, but the only ones truly awake. The ones who don't need marriage because they've already made the most radical commitment of all, to themselves. And yeah, society loves to clap for independence, until it's real. Until someone actually shows they can be alone and still be happy. That they don't need rituals to feel whole. Then come the fake concern comments. The judgment masked as care. Don't you ever feel lonely? What if you regret it later? Maybe you're just afraid of commitment. But what they really mean is, how the hell are you okay without everything I thought was necessary? Your existence alone calls their choices into question. Your peace challenges the urgency in their lives. Your independence shines a light on the thing they don't want to face. Maybe they didn't choose marriage. Maybe they were just too scared not to. Maybe they confused need with love, fear with commitment, emptiness with romance. That's why they look at you with a mix of curiosity and rejection. Because they can't label you. You're not a cynic, but you're not a believer either. You're not a hermit, but you're not needy. You chose the hardest path there is, thinking for yourself in a world that rewards repetition. And that, quietly, is a threat. Because if you can build a full life without getting married, then they can't say it was the only way. They can't keep blaming the system without facing their own fear. Your freedom reminds them that they had a choice too. And they didn't take it. That's a hard truth to look in the eye. So yeah, you're a danger. But not because you're cruel or selfish or antisocial. You're a danger because you prove there's another way to be in the world. A way that's more aware, more grounded, less scripted. A way that makes people uneasy because it's free. And in a world that runs on fear, freedom will always be the most dangerous thing. It's not that marriage itself is the problem. What suffocates you is the obligation disguised as choice. The silent pressure hiding in those repeated questions from family, in the probing looks from friends, in that awkward shift when you say you're fine, alone. The pressure doesn't scream, but it weighs. They keep asking when that person is going to show up, like your life's on hold. Like your present is just a waiting room for something more legitimate. What's most unsettling isn't that you don't feel the need to get married, it's that you're not even looking anymore. And that breaks the script. Because deep down, everyone knows there's an invisible system that keeps the machine running. Desire, fear, promise, consumption, disappointment. Everyone's expected to step into that loop, because that's where control happens. A person who's desperately longing for something can be steered, but someone who's turned off that inner hunger, who's found wholeness without needing outside structures, that person can't be manipulated. Maybe that's why so many dress it up as free choice. I want to get married, they say with confidence, without realizing how much of that want was handed to them. Because no one's born wanting to sign a contract. No one's born believing they're only valuable if they belong to someone. That's all taught. Absorbed. Swallowed along with fairy tales, pop songs, rom-coms, and advice from broken people just echoing what they were told. But you paused. Somewhere along the way, you stopped to think. Not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Because you couldn't keep repeating things without asking yourself if it was what you really wanted. Because you started to feel that you couldn't build a real life on borrowed foundations. And when you did, you started to see the cracks. You couldn't close your eyes again. Because once you see, you can't unsee. Maybe it started with heartbreak, a forced loneliness, a betrayal that knocked the wind out of you. Or maybe it was quieter, an inner silence, an unease that settled in unnoticed, a gut feeling that nothing you were living really felt like yours. It doesn't matter how it started. What matters is that you didn't ignore it. You stayed. You watched. You listened. And slowly, the world's noise started sounding fake. You realized you didn't want to live a life built on the fear of being alone. That you didn't want to settle for emotional scraps just to feel like you belonged. That you weren't going to sign any pact if it meant giving up parts of yourself. That you wouldn't love someone more than you loved yourself. And that you weren't going to call companionship what was really just mutual dependency. You started to feel a different kind of freedom. The kind you don't shout about, but you feel it. A freedom that's not about rejecting love, but about not worshiping it like salvation. One that doesn't run from others, but doesn't need them as crutches either. A freedom born from inner stillness, from making peace with your own voice, from the relief of not having to pretend. And in that freedom, you saw something even more radical. Not every human connection needs to lead to an altar to be meaningful. Then came the small exiles. Some people drifted away. Others looked at you like you'd veered off course. They didn't get that your path isn't a detour, it's a return. Not to tradition, but to yourself. They called it selfishness, immaturity, fear of commitment. But you knew it was self-love, emotional maturity, and a higher kind of commitment. The kind where you vow to live a life not dictated by fear. Sometimes it stings. Not because you crave connection, but because awareness can be isolating. Being awake comes at a cost. Freedom isn't always comfortable. There are days when you wish you could go back, pretend you didn't see, didn't feel, didn't understand. But you can't. Clarity, like fire, lights up and burns. And you've chosen to keep walking even with your skin still raw. Maybe deep down, you know you're not alone. That somewhere out there, others have woken up too. Others who felt the deep quiet of not needing to belong. Who've also rejected the comfort of a pre-written life. They're not easy to spot, because they don't make noise. But they're there, living their way, choosing real connections over social contracts. Loving when it comes from the soul, not from a schedule. People like that, like you, are the real dissenters. Not because of what they say, but because of what they no longer need. Not because of what they break, but because of what they stop holding up. Not because of what they reject, but because they're willing to live in solitude, if that's what it takes to stay honest. They're dangerous, even if they're quiet. Even if they don't lead protests. Even if they never march. Because just by existing, they start to deprogram the system. You've discovered that the deepest kind of love doesn't always show up as a romantic partner. That some hugs don't need arms. That some kinds of fullness don't fit inside a shared bed. That entire lives can bloom without ever needing to be validated by an institution. And the most radical act isn't always breaking with what's outside, but breaking with what's inside. The belief that you need to be completed by someone else to matter. You've stopped begging for affection. You've learned to choose from abundance, not from lack. You're no longer drawn to someone who fills a hole, but to someone who respects your space. Who can sit with you in silence, without fear. Who doesn't want to cage you, but wants to see you free. And if that person never comes, it's okay. Because you're already with yourself. Because you've stopped chasing ideals and became your own sanctuary. None of this is a rejection of true love. It's the opposite. It's purification. A clearing out. A return to the essential. Because only those who don't need love are free to give it. Only those who don't depend can love without demands. And only those at peace with themselves can open to another without becoming a slave. Maybe one day you'll choose to share your life with someone. But it'll come from a different place. Not because you need to, but because you want it. Not out of fear, but from expansion. Not out of pressure, but from truth. And if that day never comes, you'll still be okay. Because you already are. Because now you know, the deepest fulfillment doesn't come from belonging to someone, but from simply being. And that, whether people understand it or not, is what makes you truly free. And for a world built on dependencies disguised as love, you, with your silence, your peace, and your clarity, are the most dangerous thing there is. You didn't choose this path out of arrogance or some empty rebellion. You ended up here because you've seen too much, felt too deeply, understood what most people don't even dare to look at without flinching. It's not that you don't want to share your life, it's that you're no longer willing to betray yourself to do it. It's not that you don't believe in love. You've just stopped buying into the version of love we were sold, the one that demands sacrifices that feel like slow death, contracts that chain your soul, promises made out of fear of being alone. Now you know. You don't need to get married because you've stopped lying to yourself. You've let go of the need to fit into a mold that was never really yours. You're no longer interested in helping others sleep better at night knowing you followed the right path. Because that path, no matter how perfect it looks from the outside, feels crooked inside when you walk it with your eyes shut. You've crossed an invisible threshold. One that doesn't come with applause or celebration or public recognition. There are no flowers at the finish line. No photos to share. Just one quiet truth. You are exactly where you're meant to be. With yourself. No crutches. No masks. No need for explanations. And not everyone can understand that. Most people are still chasing approval, even if they call it love. Still clinging to structures, even if they call it freedom. Still running from loneliness, even if they swear they're choosing consciously. But you don't run anymore. You don't operate from desperation. You don't need to justify your peace. You've learned that walking away from the noise gives you a kind of power that doesn't scream. That kind of power isn't taught in college. You can't buy it at a bookstore. You won't find it trending on social media. It's the kind of power that grows quietly, like roots underground, unseen, deep, and unshakable. The power of someone who stopped trading their truth for a little bit of company. The power of someone who no longer bows to the fear of emptiness. The power of someone who made peace with their shadow and chose to break the chains instead of passing them on. And now you move through the world differently. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't argue with people who don't get it. You don't defend how you live anymore, because it's no longer a choice, it's just who you are. And that changes everything. You stop asking for permission. You stop apologizing for choosing yourself. You stop carrying guilt for saying no. Sure, there are days when the world whispers in your ear again. Days when collective pressure dresses up like truth. Days when you see other people's rituals, weddings, parties, happy announcements, and wonder if you miss something. But then you come back to yourself, close your eyes, and feel the stillness in your chest. And you remember, you didn't miss a thing. You saved yourself. You saved yourself from a life built on forced silence, unconscious pacts, promises born of fear. You saved yourself from living on someone else's timeline, from repeating hollow words like ritual, from sharing nights with someone who never really saw you. You saved yourself because you refused to sign a contract that demanded you abandon your soul just to belong. And that salvation, no fireworks, no grand finale, is the most sacred thing you have. Because no one else can give it to you. It was born from your clarity, your refusal to lie to yourself. You've come to understand that not needing to marry isn't a lack, it's a victory. A quiet summit reached with inner bleeding, with doubts, with invisible breakings, with truths that hurt but set you free. You've paid a price. You know that. You've lost connections, lost certainty, lost belonging. You've had to face your emptiness and learn to live in it without falling apart. You've made silence your friend, time your mirror, solitude your teacher. And in return, you gain something money can't buy, alignment. That straight line connecting what you think, what you feel, what you choose, and what you do. And now you understand why you're dangerous. Because you don't need. Because you don't depend. Because you don't fake it. Because you don't obey. You've unmasked the illusions that keep this whole society running. You've stopped playing the social theater. You're not after recognition anymore, especially if it comes at the cost of your truth. You're dangerous because you're a possibility. Your life proves there's another way. And that makes people uncomfortable. Because every person who sees you at peace without following the script starts to wonder. Your presence becomes a mirror reflecting the freedom they never dared to choose. And not everyone's ready to look. You don't need to raise a flag. You don't need to prove a point. You just need to keep being. Keep walking your path with the calm of someone who's no longer searching, because they've found it. Of someone who's not running, because they've made peace. Of someone who's not performing, because they're just living their truth. You've discovered life doesn't need forced deals, or dependency, or hand-me-down rules. You've learned that real love is born from freedom, not need. That intimacy isn't imposed, it's built slowly and without fear. That wholeness doesn't come from having someone beside you, but from fully having yourself. And even if not everyone gets it, you know what you've gained. You know what you've left behind. You know the price you paid and the gift you got in return. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to defend it. Living it is enough. Because choosing not to marry isn't a rejection of others, it's a radical yes to yourself. It's the deepest act of self-love. It's the decision to never bind yourself to anything that doesn't make you more free. And in a world where most people are still driven by fear, you, with your quiet independence and steady clarity, are, and always will be, the brightest kind of threat.